And I guess you can bring us back up to our booklet. Thank you. Nice to see all you folks. Ladies and gentlemen, we will.
Frozen again.
Yeah, I know. I know what's going on. At least if you can hear me, we can still proceed.
Yeah,
there must
we can hear
just be something strange going on. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our February 17 meeting of the Transportation Advisory Committee. Good to see you all. Glad you'd be with us this afternoon. For those of you who are watching on Zoom, we're on WebEx or whatever you happen to tune in on. We are conducting this meeting today via teleconference. So we will be making all of our votes by roll call. And when we come into one of our action items and we need our members to vote, if members, you'll keep yourselves muted until it's time to vote. Unmute yourself. As Kelly calls your name, you can vote and we'll register the votes at the end of the roll call. Kelly, how about going ahead and let's do our roll call to ensure we have the quorum.
Yes, sir. All right. Mayor Jones.
I'm here.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Here.
Councilmember Larson.
Here.
Mr. Cross.
Here.
Mr. Rocket.
Here.
Mr. Combest.
Here.
Mr. Apple.
Here.
Mayor Horn is here.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Byram.
I'm here.
Mr. Eddie Horn.
Here.
Mr. Hutchins.
Here.
Mr. Willie Clark.
Here.
Is there anyone that I may have missed that came after I started the roll call?
Michael Lane, I'm here now. From King.
Good to see you, Mr. Lane.
Glad to be here.
Suzette Morales, Federal Highways.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, members and guests and staff. As is customary, it's my obligation to remind members if you have any potentially financial conflicts with items that are on today's agenda, you please need to notify us and we'll make a notification in writing and we'll excuse you from participating in the discussion and vote on that particular item. You all have had a chance to review the action items today. Is there anybody that believes they have a conflict of interest? If not, very good. We'll move forward. Kelly, you mentioned yesterday that we potentially could have somebody wanting to make a public comment. Do we have anybody at this time?
No, sir.
All righty. Thank you. As you know, if you are watching, you can make your public comments. You can send them to Kelly Garvin. Kelly, give us your email address that they can send a written comment to.
Absolutely. It's Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, M as in Melissa, at cityofws.org.
Very good. And you can send those comments to Kelly and they can be incorporated as part of our record. Members, you had a chance to review our minutes from our last meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or additions? Additions, I brought that twice, so that's redundant, isn't it? Corrections, additions, or revisions? Corrections, additions, or revisions? Yes, we'll do it that way. If not, we'll entertain a motion to waive the reading of the minutes and approve.
Mr. Chairman, this is Bill Apple. I do have one administrative correction where my name is listed on those minutes as mayor of the town of Kernersville. Mayor Morgan might take some offense at that, so I'd ask that it be corrected to Mayor Pro Tem, please.
Thank you, Mr. Apple. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other corrections or additions? We'll entertain a motion then to approve and accept the minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Sorry, who made the motion, please?
Second,
Lane?
Adams.
Ms. Adams, you made the second. Mr. Lane, did you make the motion?
Yes.
Very good. Mr. Lane makes the motion. Ms. Adams makes the second. Any further discussion? Kelly, please call the roll.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Ms. Adams voted yes. Mr. Larson.
Yes.
Mr. Cross,
Yes.
Mr. Rocket,
Yes.
Mr. Combest,
Aye.
Mr. Apple,
Here.
Mr. Michael Lane made the motion. Mr. Mike
Yes.
Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Byron,
Yes.
Mr. Eddie Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
and Mr. Willie Clark.
Yes.
That concludes it.
Rick Morris has also joined the meeting.
And how do you vote, Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you very much. Do we get everybody? You know, folks, I have asked our staff about this, that there are a number of boards that I'm on that have moved to an aye, nay form of voting. We understand that the city attorney has advised our folks that we still must go through the roll call. So we did make an attempt to streamline the process, but we still, under council's advice, are doing the roll call. Byron, you have the first action item for us today, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. The 2020-2029 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program is a list of all the projects programmed for the Winston-Salem urban area. This document is a subset of the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and reflects projects programming included in the state's Transportation Improvement Program. NCDOT regularly updates the STIP to include new projects and modify existing ones. This can be done for reasons such as funding, municipal requests, or schedule changes. Statewide projects are projects which are located in our planning area. As their schedules, funding, and programming is modified, these changes are reflected in our MTIP. Including your materials are project modifications, additions, and deletions, including multi-use path construction from Salem Parkway to the Strawway has been delayed construction from fiscal year 21 to 22. Brewer Road sidewalk construction has been delayed for additional planning and design. Fair Lawn Drive sidewalk construction has also been delayed for additional planning and design time. These amendments were made available for the public from December 6, 2021 to January 9, 2022 per our public participation policy. No comments were received during that time. I'll be happy to answer any questions about this item.
Any questions for Byron?
Mr. Chairman, it's Alan.
Yes, sir.
Byron, I'm obviously very interested in the multi-use path. You have a gut feel for when that's going to get started?
As far as the construction,
yeah, I mean, you said additional time for planning and design. Is that underway or?
well, for the multi-use path, it's just construction that's been delayed till
Oh, okay.
22.
Mayor Jones, this is Tonique.
Yeah, hey, Tanika.
So we do have two projects for the multi-use path, and we anticipate finalizing the construction plans within the next 2 to 3 months, and then we will advertise for construction for the portion that's adjacent to Business 40.
Oh, wonderful. So perhaps by early summer, we'd be underway with some work.
Yes, sir.
Right. Thanks, Tanika.
Very good. Any other questions? If not, may I have a motion, please?
So moved, Mr. Chairman. This is Alan.
Rick Cross, I'll second.
Mayor Jones makes the motion. Mr. Cross makes the second. Any further discussion? Kelly, please do the roll.
Mr. Goins Wooded, yes. Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Cross, voted yes, I believe. Mr. Rocket,
Yes.
Mr. Combs,
Aye.
Mr. Apple,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Mike Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Byron,
Yes.
Mr. Eddie Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
And Mr. Rick Morris
Yes.
and Mr. Clark, Mr. Willie Clark.
Yes.
That concludes it.
Very good. Thank you. That is unanimous. Byron, you have an next item for us on our planning process.
So the Fixing America Surface Transportation Act, or FAST Act, requires the North Carolina Department of Transportation and all metropolitan planning organizations in the state to annually self-certify their planning processes in accordance to federal highway as well as transit administration provisions of the federal law. The attached self-certification process and documentation includes a checklist that has been completed by the staff. The checklist shows that the MPO's transportation plan process is adequately addressing the major issues in the urban area. In the fall of 2020, FTA and FHWA conducted a formal review of the Winston-Salem MPO's planning process and found that the process is being carried out with substantial compliance. I'll be happy to answer any questions about this item.
Any question for Byron? I think this speaks highly of the trust that the feds have in our staff, as it is a self-certification process, and they do it themselves. So congratulations, staff. If there are no questions for Byron, we'll entertain a motion, please.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I would move, this is John Larson, I'd move approval, but I'd like to make a comment if I could.
Yes, sir.
If staff could check the next to the last paragraph where it says federal certification review conducted by the FHWA and FTA in the fall of 2016, next to the last paragraph in the resolution. See that on the previous page, it says we were inspected in 2020.
Good catch. I'll make that correction. Thank you very much.
If we could just make that current. It's nice to know that we've been inspected recently. I'd move approval.
Mr. Larson makes a motion. Is there a second, please?
Second, this is Allen.
Mayor Joyce makes the second. Any further discussion? Thank you, Mr. Larson. I'm glad to know that you are reading these documents. I appreciate it. Kelly, if you call the roll, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Joyce voted yes. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Larson voted yes. Mr. Cross?
Yes.
Mr. Rocket?
Yes.
Mr. Combest?
Aye.
Mr. Apple?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mr. Mike Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Byron?
Yes.
Mr. Eddie Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins?
Yes.
Mr. Morris? Mr. Morris? He may be having some technical difficulties, so, and Mr. Willie Clark.
Yes.
That concludes it.
Thank you, members. That is unanimous. Mr. Sazak or Mr. Murphy, will you be presenting our next item?
Hi, Mr. Chairman. I believe I will be starting with the presentation of the item, and Mr. Brian Murphy and Mr. Brian Mayhew will be following me up with the presentation.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the TAC. Good afternoon to you all. The item before you today is an action item for the adoption of targets for safety performance measures established by the North Carolina Department of Transportation and amending the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Per the Federal Highway Administration's Highway Safety Improvement Program, Final Rule 23 CFR Part 490, the North Carolina Department of Transportation must coordinate the establishment of safety targets with the metropolitan planning organizations in the state. Last year, on January 21st, 2021, the Winston-Salem TAC approved a resolution of support for the safety performance measure targets established by the state. In accordance with federal guidelines, the review of progress toward meeting these goals must be tracked and recorded annually in the Highway Safety Improvement Plan annual report. The measures and targets identified for 2022 include: number one, a goal to reduce total fatalities by 12.17% from 1,428.8 to 1,254.9 by December 31st, 2022. Number two, a goal to reduce the fatality rate expressed in terms of per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, by 13.78% from 1.226 to 1.057 by the end of the calendar year. The third goal is to reduce total serious injuries by 19.79% from 4,410.2 to 3,537.6 by December 31st, 2022. The fourth goal is to reduce the serious injury rate, once again expressed in terms of per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, by 21.68% from 3.782 to 2.962 by the end of the calendar year. And the fifth goal is to reduce the total non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries by 17.93% from 592.2 to 486.0, again by the end of the calendar year. On August 31st, 2021, North Carolina Department of Transportation set the above targets for the safety performance measures. MPOs may either adopt the targets set by the state and agree to program projects in support of the targets, or set their own. North Carolina MPOs have 180 days, or until February 27th, 2022, to either adopt the state's targets or set their own. The Winston-Salem Urban Area Metropolitan Planning Organization will adopt the state's targets. This information will be amended to the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And before we turn it over for questions, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce Brian Murphy and Brian Mayhew with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. They will be giving us a presentation on the performance measures, where we stand, general traffic safety trends. And one quick note before I finally turn things over is that this presentation has been updated since the time of the publication of the February TAC book. So there are some slides that will have been updated. We'll make sure that the updated presentation is sent to all of the TAC members at the very end of this meeting, as well as make sure that it is available to the public on our website. And with that, I will now turn it over to North Carolina Department of Transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter.
All right.
Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Hunter. I'm Brian Mayhew. I'm the State Traffic Safety Engineer with North Carolina Department of Transportation. And as was mentioned, you guys just kind of heard those rather tedious sounding performance metrics. And we're going to go through some data trends that North Carolina is experiencing. First, we're kind of going to go over it from the state level, and then Brian Murphy is going to share some very similar content that's specific to your MPO and your urban area. So we'll touch on the performance measures again as well, and then go over some resources toward the end that you guys may find of interest. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start through this. Let's go and go next slide. So one thing to keep in mind is in 2019, North Carolina established and adopted a strategic highway safety plan. And this is a very broad plan. It doesn't cover just infrastructure. It includes education, enforcement, and first responders. It's very broad because that's really what it would probably take in order to make some substantial gains in this state for safety. One of the most important things that this plan did was establish a goal for North Carolina. And this is not just for NCDOT, but for the state as a whole.
Excuse me, Brian, just a moment if I could. Somebody is not on mute. We're picking up a lot of external noise. So if you'll just double check, please, if you're not speaking, go ahead and mute yourself. Thank you, folks. Excuse me, Brian, please go ahead.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. So one of the most important things that the goal established was reducing all fatalities and serious injuries by half by 2035 and moving towards zero by 2050. And so that's pretty significant, and that's actually a pretty aggressive goal. And so the performance metrics that were shared with you, by Hunter reflect that goal. In order to actually reduce fatalities and serious injuries by half by 2035, those targets are what it would take in order to achieve that. And so they are considered, fairly aggressive, especially in a state that's growing and has a lot of demand on its transportation system. So next slide. Yeah, population in this state, we all know it's growing, especially in our urban areas and the surrounding counties surrounding those urban areas. Rural population is not growing too much, but certainly this is just, one way of measuring the demand on our transportation system. And again, most of that growth is being experienced in our urban areas. Next slide. VMT is just kind of a measure of activity. It's an incomplete measure because it doesn't capture bicycle and pedestrian movement and some other types of movement across the state. But it is a metric of movement and activity. And often this movement, the VMT numbers, are reflected in what we normally see in our safety metrics. They often move in similar directions. What you'll notice on the far right is that VMT really dropped off in 2020 due to COVID. It's back up in 2021, but certainly we had a big decrease, especially in the first part, of 2020. Next slide. So fatalities. This is there's not a lot of good news in this slide. You can see where fatalities have been steadily increasing in the state since around 2012. And over 1,670 fatalities in 2020. Now, what's not on this is 2021, and our preliminary numbers, unfortunately, more bad news. They are around 1,760 fatalities in 2021, so they really spiked. In fact, that's the highest number since 1973. That's almost 40 years. So I was born in 71. So for me, this is rather significant to see fatalities in the state spike that way. I will say this is a trend being experienced nationally, not just in North Carolina, but ours is fairly pronounced. But even without the spike during COVID, our numbers have been trending up pretty steadily in the last decade or so. Most of the fatalities do occur in our MPO regions, but it's somewhat evenly split between our rural areas and urban. But next slide. Serious injuries are pretty significant events. These are crashes that obviously didn't result in a fatality, but where somebody was injured in a way that's probably going to change the condition of their life for some period of time and perhaps permanently. So it is something that's worth measuring. And that's why it was on those performance targets that were mentioned before by Hunter. So it's kind of a weird looking graph because we had an injury definition change. The definition of what a serious injury is changed. And so that changes the way the data looks. But the main thing to take away is that we have a lot of serious injuries in North Carolina, around 5,000 a year now. It is increasing. It's not increasing at the same rate as fatalities, though. Next slide. Pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries. This is something that we definitely pay a lot of attention to. Pedestrian fatalities have been increasing steadily, much like the other numbers that we saw. Most of this increase is experienced in our urban areas. So most of the fatalities historically have been occurring. It's kind of evenly split. It used to be kind of evenly split between rural and urban, but almost all of the increase in the last decade has been in urban areas. And so that is definitely something that we have to make sure that our programs and our efforts understand and focus on. Serious injuries have also increased as well, although part of that spike is due to the definition change. Next slide. Bicycle fatalities are something that we pay attention to as well. In North Carolina, they've been pretty stable. They bounce around kind of between that 15 and 30 range in most years. Because it's a smaller number, you do see a lot of noise where it'll bounce around a little bit from year to year. Last year, it peaked around 30 fatalities. I'm sorry, in 2020, it peaked around 30. And in 2021, it dropped to around 15 or 20 again. So it does kind of go up and down. Again, most of these are in urban areas. Next slide. So reported crashes by year. This is something that often tracks very much the same as VMT. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it. And so this over 320,000 crashes in recent years, and it really decreased during COVID. And so COVID was very unusual for many reasons. When you see that drop in VMT and you see the drop in crashes, that kind of makes sense. But fatalities spiked. And so normally when you see a decrease in crashes or a decrease in VMT, you expect to see a decrease in fatalities. And we did not see that. Fatalities spiked in 2020 and 2021. There's definitely some behavioral issues related to that. That will, more information will come out about that, I'm sure, over time. But a lot of speed-related crashes, a lot of reckless driving crashes. I think the mood and mentality of the public is, if you're stressed or isolated or whatever the feelings are with COVID, those same feelings become present as people are driving, and so we're seeing that more and more. Hopefully that will drop back down. But again, the increase in fatalities was steadily increasing before COVID. So we'll have to see what the future year trends are. But again, it's a significant issue and it's a significant challenge. So with that, Brian Murphy is going to go over some of the similar data, but specific to your MPO in your part of the state.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Like Brian said, I'm going to go over many of those same metrics, but give you an idea of maybe what those trends look like and give you some scale of what those numbers look like in your MPO. I'll spend a couple extra seconds here on this slide just because they're all set up similarly after this. So the Winston-Salem MPO numbers will always be in blue on these slides and the statewide numbers in red. The scale for Winston-Salem will be on the left, and then the scale for the state would be at the right. So really just, again, want to get a sense for kind of how Winston-Salem MPO is trending compared to statewide, and then give some scale for the actual numbers here that we're looking at. So vehicle miles traveled, like Brian mentioned, it's a good measure of activity on our system, and so I'd say you guys are trending right along with the state as far as that's concerned. Certainly an increasing trend, except for the oddities that we saw there in 2020. Reported crashes, again, another one of those good measures of activity. If you look at the increase from 2019 to 2010 in the Winston-Salem MPO, it's about over 6,000 crashes per year increase. Did see a decrease in 2020 at the statewide level, and of course at your MPO level as well. Fatalities, again, this is one of the more important measures that we look at, that our programs are focused on. Again, seeing overall an increase at the statewide level, and then in your MPO as well. You can see there in 2010, you guys were at about 30 fatalities per year, and then up to 54 in 2017, and then 51 last year. So you guys kind of saw that same increase that we saw at the statewide level for 2020 once in the COVID period. Serious injuries, again, another key measure for us, certainly an increasing trend at the state level and also at your MPO as well. And you can see a pretty dramatic increase, 66 in 2010 to over 200 in 2020. Again, some of that's due to the definition change that officers use when they report crashes to identify what these serious injury crashes may look like. Non-motorized fatal and serious injuries. We use that non-motorized term because that's prescribed in the target setting that we do. But of course, think bicycle and pedestrian when you see those numbers. And so these numbers have been increasing no matter really how you slice up the data. Like Brian Mayhew mentioned, this is a trend at a national level, state level, and then also an increasing trend here at your MPO as well, where you can see that those numbers have doubled over the last 10 years within your MPO boundary. Pedestrian crashes, again, it's an important measure because so many pedestrian crashes do end up in a severe injury. There's just not that occupant protection there for the pedestrian if they're in a motor vehicle collision. So you can see the numbers there at the statewide level have increased some, but if you look at the numbers in your MPO, 45 in 2010 to 120 there in the last few years, really, quite a significant increase in these types of events. And the last few trends that we'll look at are more kind of behavioral related. Brian Mayhew mentioned some of these here, where we saw some oddness here, certainly with the COVID period. But the first is alcohol related fatalities and serious injuries. Significant increase there at the statewide level if you look at over time. Interesting trend at Winston-Salem MPO, where we saw those numbers were kind of flat for several years and then peaked around 2018, and the numbers in the Winston-Salem MPO actually went down some there in this category. Speed involved fatalities, again, have about doubled over the last 10 years or so. at the MPO, at your MPO level, increasing trend at the statewide perspective as well. And then unbelted. This one's always a bit confounding. You know, there's such an increase in these types of events, almost doubled at the statewide level and more than doubled at looking at the Winston-Salem MPO data. But these are certainly events that can be prevented. It just amazes me how many unbelted fatalities and serious injuries we do have on our system each year. And I want to kind of close out this part of the presentation, at least, with just giving you some sense of where crashes are occurring at within your MPO. There's some other more interactive ways to look at this information, which I'll hit on here in just a minute. But this just gives you some sense of where crashes are occurring at by municipality. If you look at that next to last column or row there, you'll see a row for rural. And rural here is just defined as outside of a municipal boundary. And you'll see that a lot of the severe injury crashes and fatal injury crashes there, a good percentage of those are occurring in the rural areas. Obviously, Winston-Salem there being the biggest metropolitan area in this MPO area is carrying a lot of those crashes and fatal injuries as well.
Brian, one quick question before you move on that slide.
Yes, sir.
And members, feel free to jump in at any time if you have questions. Would it be an accurate comparison if we were to pull some numbers that took a look at these reported crashes by percentage of population? Would that be an accurate reflection?
Yeah, that's certainly one way to look at the data. We've had requests for that in the past. And yeah, we can certainly provide that data broken down, kind of a per capita look, if that would be helpful for you. Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. Quickly, I'm going to run through safety performance measures really quickly. Hunter gave a good overview of that before we started, so I'm just going to give a little bit of background about what they are, why we do them. It is federally required. There's a couple of federal funding legislations that actually require that we look at highway safety targets, and the targets we look at there are on the screen. So the number and rate of fatalities, number and rate of serious injuries, and the number of ped bike fatalities and serious injuries. The targets are set for 5-year rolling averages. They are for calendar years, and you guys have been through the cycle a little bit, so you know that this is kind of an annual exercise that we go through. Reporting dates, so the state reports in August, you all report in February, which is why we're talking to you in February. And those targets, how are they set? So that's up to each state and MPO. So there is some flexibility there. MPO can adopt the state methodology, which is what most MPOs have done to this point, or you can come up with your own. And so there's a little bit of flexibility there. You don't necessarily have to track exactly with the state, but if you differ, that's a conversation we'd like to be involved in. I'm going to skip through a few of these again, just in the interest of time. So how do we get those actual numeric values that go with those targets? As Brian maybe mentioned, the goal from the Strategic Highway Safety Plan that was adopted in 2019 is to reduce fatalities and serious injuries by half by 2035. So we know historically where we are, and so we know where we were in 2018 when the plan was adopted, or the data, full year of data that we had, and we know where we want to be in 2035. So a little bit of math can get us where those targets need to be in order for us to meet that 2035 target at any specific year. Assessment. So FHWA does assess the states on whether they meet or make significant progress towards targets. Early last year, we were assessed on our 2019 targets, and we're about to go through a similar assessment here for our 2020 targets. Just a reminder, the MPOs are not directly assessed, but obviously if we're to meet these targets at the state level, it's one of these things where we're kind of all in it together. So based on FHWA's review, North Carolina did not meet or make significant progress toward achieving its safety performance targets in 2019. And you see the numbers there on the screen, and this data is available in your packet. If Winston-Salem MPO had been assessed, again, they're not assessed by the federal agencies, but if they had, Winston-Salem would not have met those targets either. I'm going to skip through these because Hunter's kind of already gone through these, and I'm going to spend just a second here kind of going through some of the resources that are available. And I'm going to share another screen here just really quickly. I wanted to share with you some of the data that's out there. And so there's a lot of information, a lot of safety data that's mapped and location based that you can go and kind of look at. There's links to our website, which has a lot of these information kind of in one spot. But there's also some dashboards that we've created fairly recently where you can go in and look at your MPO area, or if you're interested in looking just at a city or a county, you can do that as well. And so you can kind of get a sense for what the numbers look like, within these specific boundaries. And so, once you select an MPO, you see the numbers around the side will adjust as well. So this dashboard is pretty simple, but it gives you some of those good key metrics for a specific area. Um, we also have some of these dashboards for specific to pedestrian and bicycle crashes as well. Like Brian mentioned, this is one of the key focus areas for our group, and it is one of those areas where trends have been increasing. And so these behave very similarly to the dashboard I mentioned earlier, but you've got a little bit more detailed information and, again, the same behavior. So you select an area and you're able to see more detailed information about the crashes in your area. Let's see, a couple more here, just show quickly. All of our fatal and serious injury crashes, again, that being a key metric for our department, are mapped. First thing you'll notice about this map is there's way too many yellow and red dots on there. There's too many of these events. But just to kind of show you how these look, you can actually zoom into an area, see exactly where these crashes occurred. If you click on one of the events, you'll see more information about what type of crash it was. Of course, you got date and time, but also some of these contributing factors as well. And then lastly, all of our safety projects that we fund for the department are also mapped and available for viewing as well. And so all the ones that have been completed since 2019 are mapped and on the site, but also those that are funded and either under design or under construction, those are also represented here as well. Again, same type of behavior. You click on a project and you can find out more information about that specific project. So I wanted to kind of go through those quickly just to give you a sense for the information that's out there and available to you. We're happy to come back later and talk in more detail with any of those. But I'd say with that, Hunter, I don't know if there's adequate time now, but we'll be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Apple, I have a question, Brian or Hunter. On your presentation, the slide that's entitled SHSP Goal for Strategic Highway Safety Plan, where you state that the overall plan is to reduce all fatalities and serious injuries by half by 2035, moving towards zero by 2050. Share with me a little bit your thinking or the state's thinking as to how we get towards zero in terms of fatalities and serious injuries unless we stop traffic altogether.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a heck of a goal. It's very ambitious, and it starts with not accepting it, right? It starts with the mindset of if somebody in my family is going to walk or bike or drive from point A to point B, I don't really want them to die because they're making that trip. Even if they make a mistake, I really don't care for them to die. So I'm going to extend that mindset to all travelers in the state of North Carolina. And if we have that mindset, then what are the decisions that we have to start making about our programs in order to help accomplish that? I don't know if we'll ever get to zero or not, but I do know that it's the right goal. I definitely believe that. As far as how to do it, it's very broad. It's going to take a lot of infrastructure changes. It's going to take us to think through how we invest our dollars in order to get that return on that investment for a safety perspective. But it's going to it's going to continuous with education. One of the slides that Brian Murphy mentioned, shocking. People still not wearing seatbelts, and it's getting worse instead of better, right? So we've got to think about how we, when we communicated about seatbelts a couple decades ago, those numbers really dropped. Well, I don't know that we're messaging a lot of that with the same intensity that we used to. So certainly those behavioral things are there. that we need to focus on. Enforcement is has become and will be a complicated topic of how we enforce the traffic laws in North Carolina, but that is part of the solution. And then post-crash care is something that we have to pay attention to more. How do we get, when people are injured, how do we get them to the best possible care quickly enough? This is really a little bit bigger in our rural areas than our urban, but it is something that is important. So there is not one solution. It's going to be a marathon.
I appreciate that, and I would agree with you 100%. If it's your loved one, you want it to be zero, so I share that with you.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Adams.
I have a question. Since we know that people now are at the mindset that a lot of people don't want to wear seatbelts, why wouldn't we, the states or the federal government, address the issue with car manufacturers that the car can't go unless the seatbelt is buckled and there is a body in it? Much like when I put too much weight on the seat in my car, the alarms go off letting me know, the person in the seat, there's something in the seat and the belt isn't fastened. But why wouldn't the car not, in the driver's side, not allow a person to put the car in drive? You can start it, but to actually put the car in drive, that's one of my questions / comments. The other one is, why wouldn't we look at what happens if we don't meet our goals? We all know how that goes, but is there a penalty if we not able to move the needle on our numbers and the numbers keep going up?
I'll answer the second one first of your two questions. And as far as a penalty, for the penalty is assessed at the state level, not at the MPO level. So when we do not meet our goals or our targets, then the state, the first penalty is that the state must ensure that we have spent all of our safety dollars on safety. And the reason for that is there's flexibility in these dollars. They can be transferred out of safety and used for something else. And in North Carolina, that's not going to be a problem. We obligate and use all of our federal safety dollars on safety projects. We don't transfer that money. So there would not be a penalty from that perspective. The other thing that we have to do is we have to do additional planning and identify additional strategies to help reduce fatalities and serious injuries and communicate what those are. So that is one thing that we have done and will continue to do at the state level. We are encouraging MPOs as partners to follow a similar process, but there is no financial impact on the MPOs, from the federal level. So that's definitely kept at the state level. So I will say on the target setting, we set aggressive targets compared to some other states in the country. And so we know we are likely to fail. I mean, we would much rather meet the targets, but we know that we are likely to fail. And we know that when we fail, we have to have a lot of communication with people across the state as to why we're failing and why we're not moving toward reducing fatalities and serious injuries. And those are tough conversations, but they're good conversations. Your first question, I don't know. I don't know why in this country there is, I think, there has historically been a reluctance with car manufacturing and NHTSA, the federal agency that oversees that, to put in technology that takes away that personal liberty, right? In theory, you could make cars that cannot speed, and you could make cars that won't run without wearing your seatbelts. But historically, that has not been the direction in this country on how that is regulated. And I don't know when or if that's going to change.
Members, any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Let's see, Mr. Rocket, I think you were first in.
Okay, I know I understand it's an estimate, but how do you determine vehicle miles traveled?
It is an estimate. Brian, you take that one if you want to.
Yeah, sure. It's based on a couple of different things, mainly traffic counts that we do throughout the system. Obviously, we don't count every single road every single year, so there's a lot of estimating that goes into that. That number is a very broad number. I know the amount of gas that's sold is also kind of a factor in there, but they try to base it as much as possible on actual counts and then kind of extrapolating those counts to estimate similar type facilities across the road just to get an estimate of how much vehicular travel occurs on the system itself.
Thank you.
We had another question.
Yes. You mentioned that when seatbelt messaging became prominent, it did help with that years ago. Are there any efforts to communicate some of these areas now to try to help with these issues?
There is. Our Governor Highway Safety Program is investing a good bit of time and resources into reinventing some of these campaigns that have been around for a while. You've probably heard of Click It and Ticket. That's a campaign that North Carolina is famous for. We kind of invented that. Perhaps it's time to kind of reimagine the messaging of that and really try to target the people who aren't wearing seatbelts. So instead of, now with social media and in different ways, they're looking at ways to target the campaigning, instead of radio ads and billboards, like maybe it was done years ago, maybe target through social media the people who are most likely to not wear a seatbelt. So they are making strides in doing that. They're also looking at something called social norming. And I'm not very well versed in it, but basically it's changing the messaging around from being a threat to be more like being a carrot. There's some research out there that says that is much more effective, especially for our youth, than the threat message. So there are smart people working on it.
Well, those are great. Thank you very much.
Members, any other questions or comments? If not, we will entertain a motion to amend our safety performance measures.
Rick Ross moved to amend.
Thank you, Mayor Cross.
Bill Apple seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Apple. Any further discussion? Kelly, if you do the roll, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Joins,
Yes.
Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Larson, Mr. Larson, Mr.
Yes,
Cross?
yes.
Okay.
Thank
Mr. Cross,
Yes.
Mr. Rocket,
Yes.
Mr. Combest,
Aye.
Mr. Apple,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Mike Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Byron,
Yes.
Mr. Eddie Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
Mr. Morris,
Yes, I'm back. I had a signal drop, and I'm yes on that previous motion also.
and Mr. Clark, Mr. Willie Clark.
Yes.
That concludes it.
Very good. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. Matthew, you're going to tell us how to reduce bicycle and pedestrian accidents, right? No, that's not your
Yes.
topic today, but welcome.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, TAC members. This is related to data and access to transportation data for the MPO. So NCDOT is a partner agency in the Eastern Transportation Coalition, which is a group of 17 states and the District of Columbia focused on connecting public agencies to increase safety and efficiency in transportation. As a member of that coalition, NCDOT has access to transportation data through HERE Technologies, which is a data aggregation and representation company. focused on providing transportation data to governments and businesses. NCDOT has invited MPOs and member jurisdictions to access the transportation data to assist with planning efforts at the regional and local levels. To access this data, though, each agency must sign a data use agreement with the coalition. And once that agreement has been executed, our MPO would be able to access the transportation data to assist, again, with our transportation planning and decision making. There's no financial obligation for the MPO to enter into this agreement with the coalition or to access the data. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the data or the agreement.
Sorry, folks, I had muted myself, and while I was watching myself talking, it was entertaining, but not very effective. With that, with no questions for Matthew, we'll entertain a motion, please.
I move for approval, Mr. Chair. Ms. Adams?
Second, Lane.
Ms. Adams makes the motion. Mr. Lane makes the second. Any further discussion? Kelly, if you do the roll, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Joynes?
Yes.
Ms. Adams voted yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Cross?
Yes.
Mr. Rocket?
Yes.
Mr. Combest?
Aye.
Mr. Apple?
Yes.
Mr. Lane voted yes. Mr. Mike Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Byron?
Yes.
Mr. Eddie Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchings?
Yes.
Mr. Rick Morris? Mr. Morris? And Mr. Willie Clark?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. Moving on, we have one informational item to prepare us for our meeting next month. Byron, I believe that's yours.
Yes, sir. Well, again, the 2020 to 2029 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program is a listing of all the projects programmed for the Winston-Salem urban area. Again, this document is a subset of the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and reflects projects programming included in the state's Transportation Improvement Program. NCDOT, again, regularly updates the STIP to include new projects, modify existing ones. This can be done for a number of reasons, such as funding, municipal requests, schedule changes. Statewide projects are projects which are located in the planning area as their schedules, funding, and programming is modified. These changes are reflected in our MTIP. Including your materials are project modifications, additions, and deletions, including future I-74 noise wall construction. It's been corrected because of a misprint. It now shows construction being scheduled for FY22. Funding modifications for part for capital and operations through the fiscal year 26. These amendments were made available for public review made available for public review between February 5th, 2022. That's also a correction in your book to March 9th, 2022 for our public participation policy. This item will come back in March and we will provide any comments at that time. I'm happy to answer any questions about this item.
Thank you, Byron. Any questions? All righty, this will be on our agenda in March for an action item, so you'll have some time to review it between now and then. Members, as always, we're entering into the staff reports generally for our information. We don't go through these unless a particular member has one they'd like to pull out and ask for that report to be made at this time. Does any member wish to identify any of those reports that they'd like to have at this time? Mr. Ivy, I know you were always wanting for an opportunity to address. Would you like to take that opportunity?
Actually, Mr. Chair, there's not been a lot of change since our last meeting, but certainly available to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Pat. Members, any final comments?
Chairman?
I'm sorry, who is that, please?
This is Suzette with Federal Highways.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have anything in the reports, but I did want to bring a couple of things. to you all's attention, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so there are a couple of funding opportunities that have arisen since the new bill. And I just wanted to give you guys updates on them, as they could be opportunities for you guys for funding. The first one is the Bridge Formula Program. That one gives about $5.5 billion each year between fiscal year 22 and 26. And so states will receive about $45 million each fiscal year. This funding is for highway bridge replacement, rehabilitation, preservation, protection, and construction of public roads. Federal Highways wants to first focus the funding to improve conditions of existing bridges in poor and then fair conditions. But there is encouragement to fund for new bridge construction that addresses equity, barriers to opportunities in rural communities, and that also resort in community connectivity. Funding can also be used to address needs to highway bridges that impede mobility, such as freight or services, and then emergency responses in school buses, and anything also related to resiliency and climate change. One thing to note with this program, as well as all projects with federal participation, this project, when you replace, or this program, whenever you replace or rehabilitate a highway bridge deck, you're required to provide safe accommodations for pedestrians or bicyclists, as long as that bridge is on a highway that allows them. And also, one particular benefit is that FHWA also encourages states to use this funding on off-system bridges. So those are highway bridges that are located on public roads other than federal aid highways. So this means that there's a cost share of 100% federal funds for off-system bridges that are owned by a county, which is, not NCDOT, but a county, towns, township, municipalities, cities, or any other local agency. So like I said, you should definitely try to take advantage of this 100% federal cost share. So 15% of the bridge funds for this program is set aside for off-system bridges at a minimum. So, work with your, work with NCDOT so you can talk with them about this opportunity. And so then the next funding opportunity I want to bring up is the RAISE grant. So that has come up pretty recently, and applications are due on the 14th. This particular time, with Winston-Salem, it is an urban area, so it would require 80-20 for federal and match. But one additional thing is that areas that are considered areas of persistent poverty or historically disadvantaged areas, those areas have the opportunity to get 100% federal funds. There's a webinar coming up in next week with RAISE, where you can learn about how to find out which particular areas within your MPO could be considered that. So if you have any projects in that area, you can take advantage of that up to 100% cost share. And also they have recordings of just the RAISE program anyway, if you're interested in looking at that as well. So those are my updates for you guys today.
Thank you, Suzette. Would you provide that information to Tanique or Kelly, and they can distribute it to our members?
Sure, I'll absolutely do that.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Any more comments, members? If not, it's always good to see you. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn today's meeting.
Sir, just one reminder about ethics. This is Kelly. I'm so sorry. Just to remind everybody to go ahead and file your ethics by April 15th. Please do not wait for the last minute. And if you need any assistance, just feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to help you complete those forms. That's all.
Thank you, Kelly. That was highlighted on my agenda and I just missed it. Thank you for the reminder. Members, anything else? If not, Do we want to adjourn?
I move for adjournment, Mr. Chair.
Sounds like Ms. Adams makes the motion.
I'll second.
Second.
Is
Eddie,
a second, please?
Eddie Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. No relation, I'm sure.
Don't believe so. No, sir.
Are there any other discussion? Very good. Kelly, if you call the roll, please.
No
Can we
roll
just-
call necessary.
We can
No
just
need-
adjourn, can't we?
None.
Very good. Folks, good to see you all. Have a great and safe weekend, and we'll see you in March 17th. Thanks,
you.
folks.
Thank you.